The impudence, the audacity, the unmitigated gall of those knuckleheads of liberty podcasters, daring to voice opinions outside the mainstream of accepted thought. Listen if you dare. It's angry, it's funny, it's even sometimes sad, but it's always based on freedom and justice, as you will see. Here's our host, Jason McPhee.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty. We're coming at you on the day after Christmas, December 26, 2022. And boy, I tell you, we got a special Christmas present this time. We get to talk to David DeLugas. He is Executive Director of Parents USA and a practicing attorney. And he's going to talk to us today about a lot of issues regarding parents' rights and things that are going on in that realm. But before we get into it, let me introduce you to our panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. We had our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett, here, but he popped out. Hopefully he'll pop back in at some point during the show. In the bottom of our, moving to the top right of our screen is David DeLugas. And as I said before, he is executive director of Parents USA. He's the founder of it, and he is also a practicing attorney. But just as a disclaimer, don't take this show as legal advice. If you have a specific legal problem, you need to consult an attorney yourself. So anyways, I can't think of anything else. So let's just jump right into the show at this point. Parents, it's kind of always been challenging to be a parent, but it seems like in this day and age of Karens running around everywhere, just sort of, peeking at however you're raising your kids and calling foul, it's really kind of a fraught time to be a parent, where states are sort of willy-nilly jumping in on people's relationship with their kids and wanting to jump in on that. And so we had a story that we wanted to bring up. ProPublica brought up, and maybe we could bring up the visual on this, James. And it's essentially the death penalty of child welfare. In 6 months or less, some parents lose their kids forever. And this is something that's, I guess kind of being spearheaded in, I think it's West Virginia, but it certainly can happen in a lot of different places. It's just that it seems to be on a fast track in West Virginia, where you can lose your kids, and as quick as about 5 or 6 months if the state feels like there's something abusive going on there. So anyways, let me kick this to you guys. In fact, I'll throw it to David first. David, did you want to talk at all about this issue of how easy it is to lose your kids nowadays?
Well, yes, I do. And thank you for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to hopefully inform, educate, and call all of us to do something to change the tide. The parent-child relationship is really what's important. And let's look at it from the point of view of children. We often talk about the rights of parents, and sometimes the response is, well, what about the rights of children? Oh, absolutely. Every person, child or adult, has the right to pursue happiness, to be healthy and happy, to have those opportunities. And one of those, what's required is that you're free from harm from others. That's why we have all these laws that say, don't drive drunk, don't hit one another, assault, don't kill one another, murder. They're all there. And you should never abuse a child ever. But the term abuse has become loose lingo for those in positions of power. And what I mean by loose lingo is it means anything. It means everyday parenting decisions, the ones that get the greatest outrage nationally. But again, with our short attention span, it doesn't last very long, are situations where parents are subjected to CPS investigations or actually arrested and charged with crimes for doing nothing more than allowing their child outdoors to play, to walk, or to be home alone without an adult present. And those decisions need to be made reasonably and comfortably by the person who knows most about the children, their age, their maturity, their physical abilities, their intellectual abilities, their deficiencies, and make a decision about, is my child safe to do these things? That's another topic. We may cover it later here, but as to what goes on, not just in West Virginia, but nationally, is, and please everybody think about it, the government puts in place laws, and when money's attached to it, the intention is that money will motivate. So what has occurred is a law was enacted that presumably was for the laudable purpose of not seeing children languish in foster care. So if they're not going to languish in foster care, there are only two ways to go. One, terminate parental rights completely and let them be in foster care or be adopted out to a family, or to somehow get them to return to their parents. And the laws in most states require the state to expend energy resources to try to reunite the child with the parent under safe circumstances. But often, too often, the so-called abuse is the result of poverty, which is why disproportionately people of color are, and including Native Americans, are subjected to a child being removed, placed in foster care, then fast-tracked because the money motivates, or the people in charge of the programs too quickly come to the conclusion, well, this child will be better off never returning to their parents. And here's a clue. Everybody think about this. And I can remember, and it's not about me, but I can remember crying from the podium in front of a judge speaking to this issue. It was the termination of a mother's parental rights. A healthy, alive mother who was in town nearby, was not on drugs, had no issues, but she had some mental health issues and had left the country, gone to her native Norway for a year, while the dad and his wife, stepmom, took care of the boys who knew their mom. And she wanted to return and reunite with them, and the judge dismissed it. But as I spoke to the issue, and this comes into play, I think, again, in most every case, adult children who have been adopted seek out their biological parents. Adult children who have lost their parents to death, disease, or war, or anything else, cry for their parents who they've lost. And yet we make it sound as if, well, you know, a child in foster care who has these parents who are poor, or these parents who have had difficulty getting off of drugs, or they're still on drugs, they're better off without their parent. And the truth is, again, it varies from child to child. I don't want to put everybody in the same umbrella, but let's not put them in the umbrella of, hey, they don't really need their parents. There's this natural yearning for a child to want to be loved by their parent. Now, if they're not loved and cared for by their parent, and they're subjected to harm and physically, sexually abused, and it cannot be, those are circumstances where certainly it makes more sense. Because constitutionally, government does have the right to infringe on our fundamental rights, whatever it is, First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, all of those, when there's a compelling governmental interest. And protecting children from harm is one of those compelling, legitimate governmental interests. So it can be done. The question is, how does it really benefit the child? What are the resources being expended? And are these decisions being made by human beings, because that's what's happening, who are motivated by the gold star they get when they complete the adoption, the termination of parental rights, and the adopting out of a child? There are financial incentives, and therefore money motivates. I mean, our tax code, everything about how government incentivizes humans to act is motivated by money. And we may dismiss and go, oh, nobody would ever do that just based on money. Well, they may not consciously do it, but the incentive is there. Let's take the incentive away and see how these numbers change.
You know, but David, you just spoke about a compelling state interest in terms of protecting the child from harm, which I mean is noble, I would imagine. But where do you draw this line, though? How do we know at what point it becomes more important to remove the child from the home, or to terminate, or go for so far as to terminate the rights of the parents? Where do you draw this line?
Wait, and hold on. Before David jumps in too, I just wanted to put this out there, because for libertarians, a lot of this it's a tough issue because
Definitely.
if you're a child and we're saying that you don't have complete responsibility for yourself, then who speaks for you? And so then that's where most people think, okay, it's certainly the parent. But in some cases, I think we all recognize maybe there is a compelling reason for the state too, and that's where it really gets dicey because there's going to be a conflict there potentially of where it ends for the parent and where it starts with the state. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right, Jason. And one of the questions we all should have is, holistically, are we helping a child more by snatching them up, putting them in a foster home, and then saying, okay, parents, you have this timetable of getting your act together, and poverty may be one of the issues, because you're not providing shelter for a child, you're not providing sufficient nutrition for a child. And then, oh, we're going to terminate your parental rights because you haven't acted in accordance with the timetable we've given you. And you would think parents would be motivated. So it may not be a matter of motivation, or maybe it is in some cases. It may be a matter of capacity and ability. So we really do have a dilemma when you consider those parents who are either physically, intellectually, or psychologically disabled or deficient in some way. At what point do their rights as parents or their responsibility to their child no longer matter to the child? Because again, if we're looking out for the child, maybe the first step would be some intervention, as in, hey, we need to help the family, we need to help the parents and the child. And I mentioned in pre-production that there's a law, and it's in Florida, and it has to do with grandparent visitation. Completely different topic, mind you. But what I found significant is it's one of the only states in the country that requires a trial court to must consider the parent-child relationship and the damage to it that would be caused by imposing on the parents grandparent visitation, taking the child away from the parents. You're going to grandma's house over the objection of your mom or your dad or both. The trial court must consider that relationship and various factors within it, such as why does the grandparent have to come to court in order to get an order because they can't convince their own child or their former in-law, daughter-in-law, or son-in-law to allow contact. That's significant to me. It ought to matter everywhere, as in, if we're going to place a child in foster care, there should be some balancing of, is this actually benefiting the child and necessary for immediately in order to protect the child? Or should this be a week, take the child out for a week, 10 days, something, meanwhile, intervene, try to help the parents. The resources are being spent. Look, as a society, we're actually extraordinarily charitable in giving, as a society, the resources that we provide to a lot of categories of people, including parents who are not doing well. Again, drugs, poverty, other reasons that they're not able to care for their own children. So let's take some of those resources and try to direct them to fixing the root problem of the parent, which benefits the child by allowing the child to return with their siblings to their own parents. Because often, although again, there are directives that suggest or indicate the state must try to keep siblings together, that doesn't always happen. So you have siblings who get separated out, or maybe two children who are siblings are half siblings because they have the same mom but different dads. In those circumstances, what happens? Again, not to micromanage what the states are doing, but the state needs to be told through legislation, because we're not going to fix this through advocacy, meaning lawsuits, but through legislation that redirects the state's focus from getting kids out of foster care by terminating parental rights and getting them to be adopted out, because those financial motivations are contrary to overall what may actually be best for a child and more beneficial in the long term. Because remember, those kids, whatever ages they are when they're taken from their parents, put in foster care, terminated parental rights, and then adopted out, they grow into adults who are bearing the scars, the emotional scars of all of this. And I don't know that we are getting better at this than we've been over the last 50 years, no matter how good the intentions may be.
But this is what I'm trying to get to, David. At some level, you're saying that there's some conduct within the home that constitute that will rise to the level of a compelling state interest to protect that child. The question is, though, that I'm trying to get at, though, at what point, at what level, what it is that will trigger that the
Right.
state to take this drastic action to come into the home and remove the child. I
Well,
mean, the point is, there are some gray areas here that is really concerning to me. So what I'm trying to get is, what is the legal requirements here at stake?
oh well, when you Leon, when you use terms like, I don't mean to laugh, it's not funny, but what's funny to me is how that legal requirement is very amorphous. There's nothing definitive. The U.S. Supreme Court, in speaking to the topic of parents and children, says there must be a showing of actual physical harm, and it can't be slight physical harm that's significant, or long-term emotional harm. So if there's a temporary nutrition deficiency, does that rise to the level? Well, honestly, it's whatever CPS and the system decides it is, and it varies from county to county, state to state. It's just really not well defined, and the problem is we're not paying enough attention, as I say, we as a society, because that's somebody else's kids. Those kids don't, they're not meaningful enough to me to get involved. And state legislators are motivated by the federal money that's coming in when you terminate parental rights and when you adopt out, because that helps state budgets. So again, one of the suggestions I have is we need to balance. Maybe there needs to be a financial incentive to reunite children with their parents by helping the home become sufficiently safe that we can return children to their parents in their own home, so that financial incentive cuts both ways. And if we were to do that, the outcomes may be very different long term. By the way, if just speaking philosophically, and I don't know how to create the mechanism to make this happen. It seems to me, and here's a hypothetical for you. Let's say there's a father and he's addicted to drugs, and in his addiction, he's incapable of caring for a child. All right, so he can't care for a child, and he isn't off of drugs. It's 2022. It's the end of 2022, and the state takes the child away, and down the road makes the determination he's still hooked on drugs. He's never going to get better. We're going to terminate his parental rights, adopt that child out. Well, now the child has a different home, is adopted into that home, but I would again submit yearns for his own parents. What if 2 years from now, that dad is off of drugs, has cleaned up his act, has a job, he's in a good position? Why is it that he just he's going to get punished forever, and his child will too, because for a period of time, he wasn't able to pull himself together? Is that really what is best for that child? Should that child never be able to reunite with his own dad or his own mom? And I don't know, because I can't possibly know. And I would think every child would be different. But at the same time, why is it so permanent? When we're talking, if you commit a crime and you go to jail for a period of time, you get out and then your punishment is over because you've served your time. What period of time are we imposing punishment on parents for being incapable of parenting for some period of time? And then the state says, well, for the rest of your life, for the rest of your child's minority, you no longer get to be the parent. That's over with. That's your punishment for this period of time when you were unwilling or incapable of being in a position to adequately care for your child.
Yeah.
So would you be advocating, maybe should be advocating for maybe periodic reevaluate when the interest of the state becomes so large that we must remove the child? would it then be more appropriate for us to have periodic evaluations of the capability of the parents to raise a child, maybe an annual, maybe maybe once every 2 years or something like that,
Well,
reevaluation of the parent's ability?
the answer, I think, is yes. And whether it's once every 2 years or something, because think about constitutional rights. The moment the compelling state interest is gone, the state shouldn't be allowed to infringe. So it should be whenever that happens. And here's underlying this, incidentally, is this belief that a child is better off with permanency of adoption than the uncertainty associated with being in foster care, not knowing whether or not their parent will ever pull themselves together. Keeping in mind, during the period of time when a child is in foster care and a parent is under a plan for rehabilitation, there ought to be periodic visitation, phone calls, FaceTime calls, in-person time to maintain that parent-child bond. And what happens too often is if the parents don't show up for the visitation, and I've read a number of these cases where the parent is on a plan and yes, you have visitation, but you have to show up. You have to be clean, meaning not on drugs at the time. You have to be capable of interacting with your child in a meaningful way. But if the parents don't show up, the state takes the view of, well, they're not getting better, so let's terminate their parental rights. Let's adopt them out and give the child the permanency and the security of an adoptive home. Mind you, they don't ask the kids if that's what they want. And I don't know that there have been long-term studies that determine that, in fact, this is better for children, rather than say, hey, to certain parents, adoptive parents or would-be adoptive parents, maybe we need to find a new category between foster care and adoptive care, which is adoptive care with an opt-out, because the child can opt out if the parents clean up their acting and become, as I say, go from incapable to solid citizen capable of being a parent. But because 2 years ago they had their parental rights terminated, that 4 or 5-year-old no longer ever in their entire life can have the opportunity to rejoin that parent. I think we need to evaluate that and really revisit it. But again, the legal system, mental health care system have come to the conclusion, by and large, and it's never been questioned. It's never been challenged. I'd like to call for action for psychologists out there in academia. Let's revisit this. Let's find out. Let's study it and find out what's really better for kids. And then not just better for kids. What is the difference between harmful for kids and not harmful for kids? Because Leon's point's well taken. The state no longer has a compelling governmental interest, once the harm to the child element goes away, to interfere between the child and the parent. But yet we call this permanent. And again, I like the analogy of, you commit a crime, you might go to jail for a year or two, you might go to jail for 10, but it's not a lifetime sentence for everything.
Well, this always a tough issue when kids are in the mix trying to figure out what's the best recipe. But, in getting to that whole point of what that line is, and I tell you, we had several other stories and that I thought kind of show that maybe a lot of times when you're the government, you're a hammer and you're just looking for a nail.
Yes, exactly.
You might
Yes.
swing a little too wildly. And James, could we get the visual up on this? Because David, I know you were involved in a case in Georgia where a woman just simply left her kid in the care of her 14-year-old daughter as a babysitter, and because she had to go to work, and so the kid wandered out of the house because the girl was distracted with her homework, and suddenly she winds up being taken to jail. And that show, you actually on Dr. Phil talking about that show as well. But I just wanted to throw up a couple of these real quick, because just so we have a chance to throw them all
Incidentally,
up.
some of the terminology there, she didn't allow her 14-year-old daughter with the other 2 older children to take care of the 2 younger kids. She assigned them the task. In other words, it was a conscious decision made by a parent. hey, I'm leaving. You guys are in charge. Look after each other. I'll be back in a few hours. You're safe and you're good here. And keeping in mind, too, a 4-year-old has wandered off from an adult parent many a time.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes.
So whether it was a 14-year-old or the parent himself, these things happen. They should not become criminal.
Sure. And then, you know, the other lines too. I mean, we're literally seeing the lines being blurred right before our eyes to what constitutes abuse. And like today, there's in Virginia, they're trying to introduce bills to criminalize parents who don't affirm a child's gender identity, which when we talk about medical uncertainty, oh my gosh, I mean, this is fraught with
Well, I
medical
mean,
uncertainty.
we don't have to go all the way to Virginia. That's happening here in California, Jason.
Yeah.
Touching on that briefly is a couple of issues that really jump out at me is regardless of what the topic is, when you use gender affirming or not gender affirming, keep in mind it can go both ways. Is it harmful to a child to the point where the state should be authorized to intervene? And who's going to decide that level of harm has been reached? Leon's point again, what level of harm permits the state to intervene? And legislators want to say any kind of level of harm allows us to investigate CPS, which goes back to what you said, Jason. If you give the government yet another hammer, they're going to be looking for somewhere to swing it. And
Yes.
the idea is, yes, we want to protect children, but does that mean if a child says, hey, I want to get a tattoo, and the parents say, no tattoos, we're going to say, whoa, wait a minute, that's harmful to the child's psyche because they want to express themselves. I'm not analogizing gender dysphoria with wanting to get a tattoo, but I'm trying to analogize any disruption between a parent and a child and disagreement should not necessarily rise to the level of state intervention. First of all, we shouldn't have the capacity as a society to intervene all the time. But secondly, it needs to be to a level that it matters. And if it matters that sufficiently, then there should be mental health care providers and let them be, I don't want to say gatekeeper because that's a terrible phrase, because ultimately we have to say there's going to be disruption. There are lots of issues in our society. There always have been, there always will be. The more the creeping or the slippery slope is a phrase people are familiar with, is government more and more believing it has the right or the obligation to jump in between parent and child and intervene. School teachers do it. And one of the problems with the schools is not only are they saying, hey, we determined that there's something going on that is harmful to a child, we're going to lie to the parents about our remedy, and we're not going to let some independent fact finder using evidence under oath and expert testimony find by clear and convincing evidence harm would come so as to justify the intrusion on the parent-child relationship.
Absolutely, David. And in the end, that's what it gets to. Who decides? And boy, I tell you, your organization about Parents USA, and James, maybe we can get that on the screen before we go here so people can find it. Parents.org, parentsusa.org, rather. Check that out. It's definitely a place to go so that you can make sure as a parent that you have a bigger role in deciding than the state does, I guess.
Well, I mean, the truth is nothing happens in this country unless you're big and you're well funded, and parents need to realize, whether it's Parents USA or another organization, somebody needs to take the role of, we're going to be the bullies, if you will, to push back against government's notion that being an adequate parent isn't enough, that government can intrude anywhere and anytime it wants because government has all the resources in the world and it can pass every law at once. And we can't fight them just by saying, hey, we don't like it. No, we have to be able to go get new legislators and new governors to pass the laws that we believe protect our children and our families, and do it in a way that's effective. The ARP is big and powerful. The NRA is big and powerful. Parents have no corollary or similar entity, and we hope to grow to that size by staying the course of saying we're here for all parents. You can take whatever position you want as a parent. We only take the position about constitutional rights and the law, regardless of the subject matter or the topic.
Yes, indeed.
Well, it's certainly you can go and check that site out, and whether you need help or you want to find out how you can help, we recommend you go check that out. But thanks so much for joining us in this one, David, and we're going to have David on another one soon to talk about some other topics too. So until then, stay free.
Thank you.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.